Victoria Blake thought she could mock tradition without consequences. With one swipe of her razor, she defiled a Royal Guard's mustache, something 3 generations of soldiers had worn with honour. But she never expected what happened next. One swift move turned the tables, and soon it was her vanity on the line. Here's how an entitled Karen learned that the true cost of disrespect. Before we continue, let us know in the comments below where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow at the same time we'll bring you another incredible story showcasing the bravery and discipline of the Royal Guard. You won't want to miss it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Buckingham Palace as Guard William Blackwood stood at his post, his scarlet tunic a splash of vibrant colour against the ancient stone walls. At 45, with 25 years of military service behind him, including 3 tours in Afghanistan, Blackwood cut an imposing figure even by Queen's Guard standards. His neatly pressed uniform and polished brass buttons spoke of the 3 hours he'd spent preparing for duty that morning. But it was his distinguishing feature that truly set him apart. A magnificent moustache, meticulously groomed and maintained according to generations of family tradition. Like his father and grandfather before him, both distinguished military men, Blackwood's moustache was more than mere facial hair. It was a symbol of honour, discipline and family legacy. The moustache had been with him through sandstorms in Helmand Province, through the ceremony where he'd received his Distinguished Service Cross, through countless hours standing guard at this very post. Each morning he tended to it with the same precision he applied to his uniform, the ritual connecting him to the long line of Blackwood men who had served before him. The usual morning crowd of tourists had begun to gather, their excited chatter and camera clicks forming a familiar background to his watch. But something else caught his attention. The distinctive sound of designer heels clicking aggressively against the courtyard stones, accompanied by voices that carried the unmistakable tone of entitlement. "I can't believe you're making me do this stupid tourist thing, Marcus," a woman's voice cut through the morning air, sharp with irritation. "There are actual fashion shows happening right now, and I'm wasting my time looking at men in costume." Victoria Blake's arrival at the palace gates was like a sudden discord in a well-orchestrated symphony. Even from his fixed position, Blackwood could see her approaching through his peripheral vision. 6 feet tall in stilettos, her platinum blonde hair styled in what fashion magazines called artfully dishevelled. Her face bearing the kind of cold beauty that came from expensive procedures rather than natural grace. Fresh from her latest controversial fashion show, where she'd made headlines for deliberately tripping a rival model on the runway, Victoria moved through the crowd like a shark through shallow water. Her personal assistant Marcus scurrying behind her with an array of designer bags and a professional camera. "The Vogue shoot isn't until this afternoon, Victoria," Marcus attempted to placate her. "Besides, your social media team thought it would be good to show a more cultural side." Victoria's laugh was sharp enough to make nearby tourists wince. "Cultural? Please, these guards are nothing but glorified mannequins. I've seen better posture on runway rookies." Her voice carried deliberately, designed to provoke a reaction. Blackwood maintained his forward gaze, his moustache twitching almost imperceptibly as Victoria's clicking heels drew closer. In 25 years of service, he'd encountered every type of tourist, but something in her approach set off the same warning signals he'd learned to recognize in combat zones, the sense that someone was looking for trouble and wouldn't stop until they found it. Victoria's path through the gathering crowd was marked by muttered apologies from Marcus as she shouldered past tourists with casual disregard. Her designer sunglasses perched on her nose like a shield, allowing her to observe others while masking her own disdain. "Look at this," she announced to no one in particular, her voice carrying that particular tone of practiced condescension. "Standing there like some wax figure. Don't your legs get tired, soldier boy?" She placed herself directly in Blackwood's line of sight, her tall frame positioned to deliberately obstruct other tourists' photos. A middle-aged woman, wearing a veteran's support pin, spoke up from the crowd. "Miss, please show some respect. These men are active duty soldiers." But Victoria merely laughed, the sound brittle and sharp in the morning air. "Active duty, please?" She turned to address the growing audience, playing to the crowd like she would on a runway. "The only active thing here is my rising boredom. I've seen mannequins with more personality." Her eyes fixed on Blackwood's moustache, a predatory gleam entering them. "And what is that supposed to be? That moustache looks like something from a century ago." Marcus shifted uncomfortably behind her, clutching his collection of bags. "Victoria, perhaps we should move along. The palace gardens might make better No, Victoria cut him off, moving closer to Blackwood. The scent of her expensive perfume clashed with the morning air. "I want to understand this whole—" She gestured dismissively at Blackwood's immaculate uniform. "Costume party situation." She began circling Blackwood like a model on a catwalk, each click of her heels marking another step of her inspection. "The hat's ridiculous. The uniform looks like something from a children's storybook. But that moustache—" She paused directly in front of him, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "That moustache is the real crime against fashion here." An elderly gentleman stepped forward, his bearing suggesting military background. "Young lady, that uniform and everything that goes with it represents centuries of men playing dress-up," Victoria interrupted, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Yes, I can see that. And this one's taking it very seriously, isn't he? Standing there with his little moustache, pretending to be important." She leaned in closer, her face inches from Blackwood's. Through his disciplined forward gaze, he could see every detail of her surgically enhanced features, the cold calculation in her eyes belying her amused expression. "Tell me, soldier boy, does that moustache come with the costume, or is it a personal choice to look this outdated?" The crowd had grown larger now, drawn by Victoria's increasingly aggressive behaviour. Parents pulled their children back, tourists lowered their cameras, and several veterans in the crowd exchanged knowing looks, the kind of looks that spoke of recognition of brewing trouble. "Miss," another tourist attempted to intervene, "these guards are highly trained military personnel. They deserve to be in a museum," Victoria snapped, her composure cracking slightly at being challenged. Along with these ridiculous traditions, and especially, she reached out as if to touch Blackwood's moustache, stopping just short, this tragic attempt at facial hair. Marcus made one last attempt to diffuse the situation. "Victoria, your schedule, the Vogue shoot." But Victoria had found her audience, and like any performer sensing attention, she was just getting started. Her lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes as she opened her designer handbag, reaching inside with deliberate slowness. "You know what? I think it's time we did something about this fashion emergency." "Actually," Victoria continued, her hand still in her designer bag, "I think I'll be doing this guard a favour. Someone needs to bring him into this century, and since fashion intervention is my specialty—" Her voice trailed off meaningfully as she glanced at her assistant. "Marcus, make sure you're getting this. My followers will love a good makeover story." The morning sun caught her diamond earrings as she moved even closer to Blackwood, her presence now definitely breaching protocol distance. "Let's talk about that moustache, shall we? I've ended careers on the runway for less offensive fashion choices." She addressed the crowd like a presenter at a fashion show. "I mean, look at it. It's practically begging for professional help." An older woman, who'd been quietly observing, spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen real service. "My husband served in the Royal Marines. That moustache, young lady, is likely a mark of desperately needing my expertise," Victoria cut in, her tone sharp with irritation at the interruption. "I've transformed street urchins into supermodels. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about." Her perfectly manicured hand emerged from her bag, still concealing whatever she'd grabbed inside. The crowd's unease was palpable now. A father shielded his young son's eyes, recognizing the escalating tension. Two military veterans moved closer, their stance suggesting years of service and a readiness to intervene if necessary. You see, Victoria continued, her voice taking on a lecturer's tone, the problem with these guards isn't just their outdated uniforms or their silly hats. It's their whole commitment to living in the past. She circled Blackwood again, each step deliberate and provocative. I mean, who actually takes this seriously anymore? Standing here like statues, wearing these costumes, sporting facial hair that went out of style with horse-drawn carriages? Marcus shifted nervously behind her. Victoria, please, the schedule. The schedule can wait, Marcus. I'm about to do this guard, and the whole of Britain, really, a huge favour. She paused directly in front of Blackwood again. Think of it as my contribution to modernising this whole, she waved her hand dismissively at the palace, museum piece. Through his unwavering forward gaze, Blackwood maintained his composure, though something in his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. In Afghanistan, he'd learned to recognise the moments before an attack. The subtle shifts in atmosphere, the gathering tension, the way crowds respond to impending violence. Every instinct, honed by years of combat experience, told him something was about to happen. It's almost tragic, really, Victoria's voice dripped with false sympathy. Standing here day after day, protecting what? Some old buildings? Some outdated traditions? She leaned in close enough that her words were meant for Blackwood alone. Do you know what I do to outdated things in my industry? I eliminate them. The veteran who'd spoken earlier took another step forward. Miss, I really must insist. Oh, you must insist? Victoria's laugh was razor-sharp. The only thing anyone must do is recognise when something needs a serious update. Her hand tightened around whatever she was holding in her bag. And trust me, I am an expert at making those decisions. A young mother in the crowd pulled out her phone, sensing trouble, and ready to call for assistance. But Victoria was too focused on her target to notice the crowd's growing concern. Her eyes fixed on Blackwood's moustache with the same look she gave competing models before sabotaging their walks. Want to know something funny? She addressed Blackwood directly now, her voice carrying that particular cruelty of someone used to inflicting damage without consequences. In my world, it takes years to build a career, but only seconds to destroy one. Let's see if the same applies to your precious traditions. The morning air seemed to grow heavier, charged with the kind of tension Blackwood had last felt in combat zones. Victoria's smile widened, her hand finally emerging from her designer bag, revealing what she'd been concealing. The sun caught the metallic surface of a professional-grade electric razor. Its quiet hum seemed to freeze the entire courtyard for a split second. Several tourists gasped, realizing Victoria's intention a moment too late. Before anyone could react, she lunged forward with the practiced grace of a runway model, her movements swift and precise. Time for an upgrade, soldier boy, she declared, the razor connecting with the left side of Blackwood's meticulously maintained moustache. The blades made a harsh grinding sound as they cut through decades of tradition, leaving a stark, uneven gap in their wake. The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible. A child began to cry somewhere in the background. The elderly veteran, who'd tried to intervene earlier, surged forward, but Victoria had already stepped back, holding the razor triumphantly like a trophy. "There!" she announced, satisfaction dripping from her voice. "Now at least half of you is in this century. Should I even it out, or do you prefer the avant-garde look?" She laughed at her own joke, seemingly oblivious to the horror on the faces around her. Blackwood hadn't moved. The morning sun highlighted the damage. One side of his moustache now brutally shortened, the other still perfectly maintained, the contrast a stark testament to the violation that had just occurred, but it was his eyes that caught everyone's attention. Though his gaze remained forward, something had changed in them, a shift from ceremonial dignity to controlled fury. "Oh my God," Marcus whispered, his face pale. "Victoria, what have you done?" His hands trembled as he clutched his designer bags closer, as if they could shield him from what was about to unfold. Victoria merely shrugged, examining the razor with casual interest. I did him a favour. Maybe now the other guards will realise it's time for an update too. I mean, really, who still has a moustache like that in... Her words cut off abruptly as she noticed something change in the atmosphere. The air itself seemed to grow heavier, charged with the kind of tension that precedes a thunderstorm. Blackwood remained motionless, but there was something different about his stillness now, less ceremonial, more predatory. You have no idea what you've just done, the elderly veteran said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the true gravity of the situation. That moustache wasn't just facial hair, young lady. In the military, especially in certain regiments... Oh, spare me the history lesson, Victoria snapped, but there was a slight tremor in her voice now. Something about Blackwood's continued silence had finally begun to unsettle her. It's just hair. It'll grow back, though hopefully with better style choices this time. A younger veteran in the crowd spoke up, his voice tight with controlled anger. That moustache was likely a family tradition. Many military families, especially in the Queen's Guard. Family tradition. Victoria's laugh was sharper now, edged with something that might have been uncertainty. What is this, the Victorian era? Next you'll tell me his great-grandfather wore the same ridiculous... She never finished her sentence. In one fluid motion, smooth as silk but powerful as a striking cobra, Blackwood's white-gloved hand shot out and caught her wrist. The grip was precise, not cruel, but completely immovable. The razor clattered to the ground, its hum dying into silence. Victoria's eyes widened in genuine shock, perhaps for the first time that morning. She tried to pull away, but Blackwood's grip was like iron wrapped in velvet, inexorable, but leaving no marks. His head turned with military precision until his eyes met hers directly. The crowd drew back instinctively. There was something in Blackwood's gaze that spoke of far more than ceremonial duty. It carried the weight of generations of service, of battles fought in distant lands, of traditions upheld through blood and sacrifice. 3 generations, he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly across the now silent courtyard. 3 generations of Blackwood men have served in this uniform. Each of us wearing this moustache with pride through 2 world wars, countless conflicts, and years of dedicated service. Victoria tried to maintain her composure, but her designer sunglasses had slipped, revealing eyes that were beginning to show the first hints of fear. Let go of me! You can't. Can't what? Blackwood's voice remained measured, controlled, but carried an edge that made several onlookers step back. Can't defend the traditions you just violated. Can't respond to a direct assault on my person. Can't teach you that actions have consequences. My grandfather grew this moustache in the trenches of World War I, Blackwood continued, his grip unwavering. My father maintained his through the Falklands. I've worn mine through 3 tours in Afghanistan. Each word was delivered with the precision of a military drill, measured and exact. But someone like you wouldn't understand tradition, would you? Too busy chasing trends to comprehend anything lasting longer than a fashion season. Victoria's attempt to maintain her haughty expression was cracking. The immovable pressure on her wrist and the steel in Blackwood's voice had begun to penetrate her carefully constructed facade of superiority. You're hurting me, she tried, though his grip hadn't tightened at all. Hurting you? His voice carried a cold amusement that made several onlookers shiver. No, Miss Blake, this isn't hurt. This is just... What did you call it? A fashion intervention? With his free hand, he reached down and picked up the fallen razor, its metallic surface catching the morning light. Victoria's eyes widened as understanding dawned. You wouldn't dare, she whispered, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her growing fear. Do you know who I am? I could ruin... Ruin what? Blackwood's voice cut through her threats like a blade. My career, my reputation. Let me explain something about real reputation, Miss Blake. It's not built on magazine covers or social media followers. It's built through service, sacrifice, and respect for traditions that were earned with blood and valor. The elderly veteran who'd spoken earlier nodded grimly. Several other tourists had their phones raised, but no one dared move closer. The air crackled with tension as Blackwood's finger found the razor's power switch. "You see this uniform?" He continued, the razor humming to life in his hand. "It's not a costume. These medals, not accessories. And this mustache you so carelessly destroyed, it's been a symbol of honor in my family since before your great-grandparents were born." Victoria tried to twist away, but Blackwood's grip was like a steel vice. "Someone help me!" she called out, looking desperately at the crowd, but no one moved. Even Marcus had backed away, his expression suggesting he'd seen this comeuppance coming for a long time. "The thing about consequences, Miss Blake," Blackwood's voice took on an almost instructional tone, "is that they tend to match the offence." The razor's hum grew louder as he brought it level with her carefully styled platinum hair. "You chose to attack a symbol of military tradition. Seems only fair you learn exactly how that feels." "Wait!" Victoria's voice had lost all its earlier arrogance, replaced by genuine panic. "My shoot this afternoon. My contracts. You can't—" "Can't what?" Blackwood echoed her earlier assault on tradition. "Can't take something you value and destroy it without permission? Can't disregard your personal boundaries? Can't treat you with the same disrespect you showed to centuries of military heritage?" The razor touched her hairline, its vibration making her flinch. A small whimper escaped her throat, the first genuine emotion she'd shown all morning. "Please," she whispered, but there was no mercy in Blackwood's eyes. "3 generations of Blackwood men have worn this moustache with pride," he said, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "Each of them taught me that respect isn't asked for, it's earned. And when it's violated—" The razor began its work, creating a stark path through the Victoria's expensive hairstyle. "Lessons must be taught." The first platinum strands fell to the courtyard stones, landing among the remains of Blackwood's moustache. Victoria's sharp intake of breath was audible, a sound of genuine distress that carried none of her earlier artificial dramatics. "Now then," Blackwood's voice remained steady as the razor continued its work. "Let's discuss the true cost of disrespecting tradition." The sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of palace security and police officers, drawn by the commotion. A senior officer took in the scene. The scattered hair on the courtyard stones, Victoria's partially shaved head, Blackwood's damaged moustache, and moved forward with professional authority. "Put the razor down, sir," he commanded, though his tone carried more formality than concern. Blackwood complied immediately, his movements precise and military. "He attacked me." Victoria's voice had risen to a shrill pitch, her hand flying to her ruined hair. "Do you know who I am? I want him arrested. I want—" "Miss," the officer cut her off, his eyes noting the discarded razor that had started it all. "We have multiple witnesses and several videos showing you assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard first. Would you like to revise your statement?" Victoria's face contorted with rage, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "It was a joke! A stupid moustache! He had no right to—" "Assault on a serving member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces," the officer continued calmly, reading from a small notebook. "Violation of protected ceremonial grounds, deliberate disruption of official duties." He looked up. "Shall I continue?" 2 more guards had appeared, their expressions grim as they took in their colleague's damaged moustache. One of them was carrying what looked suspiciously like another electric razor. "Miss Blake," the officer's voice carried the weight of incoming consequences, "you'll need to come with us. After we finish documenting the reciprocal damage." He nodded to the newly arrived guards. Victoria's eyes darted between them, suddenly realizing her usual tactics wouldn't work here. My lawyer will destroy you all, she threatened, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. My social media team will... Will what? Blackwood spoke again, his voice carrying the same quiet authority that had silenced her before. Show the world how you assaulted a guard, how you mocked centuries of tradition. Please do share it widely. Let everyone see the consequences of disrespect. The guards with the razor stepped forward. Victoria tried to back away, but the officer's hand on her shoulder was firm. We believe in equivalent consequences here, Miss Blake, he said professionally. You've already experienced half the response. Shall we ensure it's evenly applied? The razor's hum filled the courtyard once more. This time, Victoria's protests fell on deaf ears as the guards methodically completed what Blackwood had started. Platinum strands joined the salt and pepper ones on the ancient stones, a strange testament to the morning's events. When they finished, Victoria stood in shocked silence, her hand trembling as it touched her newly bare scalp. Her expertly crafted image had been stripped away, leaving something far more vulnerable beneath. Your court date will be set for next week, the officer informed her, producing handcuffs. Until then, consider this a lesson in respecting British institutions. As Victoria was led away, her previous swagger replaced by stumbling steps, she turned back one last time. You've ruined me, she spat at Blackwood, tears of rage streaming down her face. My career, my image... No, Miss Blake, Blackwood replied calmly, resuming his post. You did that yourself. The difference is, my moustache will grow back. Your reputation. He allowed himself the smallest of smiles. That may take considerably longer. Marcus, who had watched the entire scene unfold, quietly gathered his bags and slipped away, already composing his resignation letter in his head. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several veterans approached Blackwood, offering silent salutes of respect. The morning sun caught Victoria's bare scalp as police officers led her toward their waiting vehicle, her designer clothes and perfectly crafted image now a stark contrast to her shaved head. Even in handcuffs, she maintained her entitled rage, spewing threats and promises of lawsuits that echoed across the courtyard. My lawyers will destroy this entire institution, she shrieked, struggling against the officer's professional grip. I'll have all of your jobs. Do you know how many magazines I've covered? How many designers will... Miss, one officer cut her off coldly. Those designers might be interested to know that assaulting a member of the Queen's Guard carries a minimum sentence of 6 months. Your court date will determine exactly how long your new look will have to last. Through it all, Guard Blackwood stood at his post, his damaged moustache a battle scar of sorts. Visible proof that while tradition might be attacked, it would never be defeated. His disciplined stance spoke volumes. One couldn't truly damage something that had weathered centuries of storms far greater than a model's tantrum. Victoria's final screams faded into the morning air as the police car door shut firmly behind her. Her carefully constructed world of runways and photo shoots would soon be replaced by court appearances and consequences. Yet even facing serious charges, she showed no remorse, no understanding, just the same entitled fury that had led her to assault a guard in the first place. As the police car pulled away, carrying its furious, bald passenger toward justice, the morning sun highlighted the scattered hair on the courtyard stones, platinum blonde mixed with salt and pepper, a strange testament to the price of disrespecting tradition. What would you have done in Guard Blackwood's position? Was justice served when someone who showed no respect for tradition faced such immediate consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And here's something to consider. In a world obsessed with trends and instant gratification, what price do we pay when we forget to respect the traditions that shaped our society? How many other valuable customs are we losing to the relentless pursuit of the new and fashionable? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and share it with someone who appreciates the importance of respecting traditions. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about the Royal Guards who stand as living symbols of duty, honor, and unwavering dedication. Hit that bell icon to ensure you never miss our upcoming uploads. Our next video will feature another compelling story that shows why these guards deserve our utmost respect. Check out the videos appearing on your screen right now to discover more moments where tradition triumphs over disrespect and dignity prevails over entitlement. Remember, true strength isn't found in the ability to tear things down, but in the commitment to uphold what matters, no matter the cost.